professional poker player laughed, offering $1 million to the maid's daughter. He thought he was playing a terrified child. He was wrong. He had just walked into a genius's trap. $1 million, little girl. Beat me, and it's yours. The crowd laughed. Poker pro Mason Ace. Harding was toying with the housekeeper's 12-year-old daughter. She was supposed to be invisible, but a spilled drink turned her into a pawn for the crowd's entertainment. This wasn't a game. It was a cruel ultimatum. If Emily lost a single hand, her mother would be fired. They would lose their apartment, their health insurance, their entire life. Trapped, she took her seat. The crowd saw a lamb for the slaughter. They had no idea they were watching a master strategist who had just set the perfect trap. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. A 12-year-old girl faced a man who bet her future on a single hand. $1 million, little girl. Beat me, and it's yours. The crowd laughed, not knowing they were watching a master at work. The Royal Oak Ballroom at the Grand Minerva Hotel was not built for people like Emily. It was a cavern of wealth, 80 feet high with ceilings painted like an Italian church. 3 chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped crystal light onto the men below. The air was thick with the smells of expensive cigars, old whiskey, and the kind of perfume that costs more than a month's rent. Tonight was the annual Aces for Charity Poker Gala. This was where the city's most powerful people came to give away money. They signed checks with flourish and posed for cameras, all while trying to prove they were smarter than the next man. The buy-in for tonight's game was $25,000. The money was supposed to help underprivileged children. Emily Vance, 12 years old and blonde, was one of those children. But she was not here to be helped. She was here to work. Her mother, Susan, was the head housekeeper at the Minerva. But tonight, a waitress had called in sick. Susan had no choice but to bring Emily, put her in a spare uniform, and have her help clear glasses. Just stay by the walls, Em, Susan had whispered, her hands rough from work. Don't look anyone in the eye. Be invisible. We just need to get through the night. Emily was good at being invisible. She moved between clusters of millionaires, her feet aching in shoes that were 2 sizes too big. Her small hands carefully lifted empty glasses from side tables. She passed the main poker table. This was the celebrity table where the main attraction was playing. Mason Ace Harding. He was a professional poker star. He had his own TV show, a line of sunglasses, and a smile that looked practiced in a mirror. He was loud, young, and dripping with confidence. His $50,000 watch caught the light as he raked in another pile of chips. Too easy, gentlemen. Mason laughed, showing his cards. You're all playing checkers. I'm playing chess. Mr. Harrison, the hotel's owner, clapped him on the back. That's why we pay you the big bucks to be here, Mason. To fleece these good people for charity. Emily paused for just a second, watching. She wasn't watching the cards. She was watching Mason's face. She was so focused, she didn't see the man stepping back. She bumped into him, and the glasses on her tray rattled. One glass tipped and spilled whiskey onto the man's polished shoe. The man was Mason Ace Harding. The ballroom went quiet. The laughter stopped. Every eye turned to the small girl in the oversized uniform. Watch where you're going, kid. Mason snapped. His smile was gone. I'm so sorry, sir, Emily whispered. Her face went pale. She fumbled for a napkin. Get your hands off me, Mason said, pulling his foot away. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. He saw a child, a servant. He noticed her eyes were still flicking toward the poker table. What? Mason said, a cruel smirk returning to his face. You like the game? The helps kid thinks she knows poker? The crowd chuckled. This was entertainment. My grandfather, Emily said, her voice barely audible. He taught me a little. He taught you go fish, maybe. Mason scoffed. Or Old Maid. The laughter. Mason fed off it. He was an actor, and this was his stage. He saw Mr. Harrison watching. He saw the cameras from the local news. This was a perfect opportunity to show off. I'll tell you what, Mason said, his voice booming across the room. I'm feeling generous tonight. It's for charity, right? He pointed a long finger at Emily. You, little girl, you and me, one hand of poker, right now. Emily froze. Sir, I can't. What's wrong? Scared, Mason said. He grabbed a chair from a nearby table and slammed it down. Sit. From across the room, Susan Vance saw what was happening. She dropped a tray of clean silverware and ran over, her face a mask of terror. "Mr. Harding, please," Susan begged, putting herself between Mason and her daughter. "She's just a child. She was clumsy. Please, I'll clean your shoes. Don't do this." Mason looked at Susan with pure dismissal. "This isn't about the shoes, sweetheart. This is about education. I'm going to teach your kid a lesson." He turned his smile to the crowd. "Let's make this interesting. It's for the kids, right?" He looked back at Emily. "Here's the deal. You play one hand against me. If you win, which is impossible, I will personally donate $1 million to the Children's Fund in your name." A wave of gasps and applause filled the room. $1 million. The cameras pushed in closer. "What a guy, Mason," shouted Frank Johnson, a loudmouthed CEO at the table. Emily was shaking. She looked at her mother. Susan was trying to pull her away. "We're leaving. Come on, Emily." "Not so fast," Mason said. His voice dropped, low and cold, just for Susan and Emily. The smile left his eyes. "Because there's another side to the bet." His cold eyes found Susan's. "When I win, and I will win, you're fired. Tonight, you pack your things, you get out of your staff apartment, and you find a new hotel to clean. We clear." Susan stopped breathing. Their home, their health insurance, their entire life. It all hung on one hand of poker. You can't," Susan whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I just did," Mason said. "I'm the main event. You're the help. Now, does she play? Or do I just have you fired right now for being insubordinate? Your choice." This was not a game. It was a hostage situation. "Emily, no," Susan cried. Emily looked at the man who was threatening to destroy her family for sport. She looked at the laughing crowd, their phones out, ready to watch a child be crushed. She looked at her mother, who was trembling. David Chun, the professional dealer hired for the event, stepped forward. He was a quiet man with precise hands, a man who had seen the ugly side of high-stakes games for 20 years. "Mr. Harding, this is highly irregular," David said, his voice firm. "She is a minor. This is not appropriate. It's a charity event, David." Mason snapped, his patience gone. "And I'm the main attraction. Are you going to deal the cards? Or should I tell Mr. Harrison you're holding up the game and ruining the fundraiser?" David Chen's jaw tightened. He looked at Emily with pity, but he knew his place. He was staff, just like her. He slowly returned to the table. "Well," Mason barked at Emily. "What's it going to be?" Emily looked at her mother's terrified face. She thought of her small bed in the staff apartment. She thought of the hospital bills they still had. Then, she thought of her grandfather. She took a deep breath. The shaking in her hands stopped. She stepped around her mother and walked to the empty chair. It was a high-backed leather chair, and she had to climb into it. Her feet dangled, 6 inches from the polished floor. She looked at Mason Ace Harding. Her blue eyes were no longer scared. They were cold. They were clear. She nodded once to David Chun. "Deal." The room exploded in cheers and laughter. Mason sat down opposite her, a picture of arrogance. "This," he announced to the cameras, "will be over in about 90 seconds." He had no idea what he had just done. He thought he was playing a hand of poker against a terrified child. He did not know that he was sitting across from a strategic genius. He did not know that this 12-year-old girl, who had been invisible for years, had been watching him, studying him, and learning every single one of his weaknesses. He did not know he had just walked into the most perfect trap ever set. The roar of the crowd faded to a hungry murmur. People pushed forward, creating a tight circle around the celebrity table. Phones were held high, recording. This was a spectacle, a lamb being led to slaughter. Mason Harding leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. He was the picture of relaxation. "All right, kid, let's get this over with. I've got a flight to Vegas in the morning." Across the room, Susan Vance was frozen. She was leaning against a marble pillar, her hand over her mouth. She felt dizzy. Mr. Harrison, the hotel owner, stood near her. He looked uncomfortable, but he wasn't stopping it. This was good for publicity. Only David Chun, the dealer, looked grim. He had a daughter Emily's age. "Texas Hold'em," he announced, his voice flat. One hand. Standard rules. His hands, which had dealt cards to kings and criminals, began their work. The shuffle was a precise, whispering sound. Emily watched the cards, but she was thinking of her grandfather, Sergeant Michael Vance. He had been a signals analyst for the Army. A man who spent 30 years listening to static, looking for patterns. He was a quiet man, with eyes as blue as Emily's. After he retired, he lived with them in their small staff apartment until he got sick. The medical bills had eaten everything they had. He never taught Emily how to play poker. He thought gambling was a fool's tax. He taught her something more important. He taught her how to see. Most people look, he would say, his voice a low rumble as they sat on a park bench. They look, but they don't see. They hear, but they don't listen. He would lay out newspapers on their small kitchen table. Show me the pattern, he'd challenge her. He taught her to read stock market charts, weather maps, and political polls. It's all just data, Emily. Everything is a system. People are the easiest system of all. They are creatures of habit. They broadcast everything they're thinking. You just have to learn the language. For the past year, Emily had been learning a new language. The language of the rich. She had been invisible. And when you are invisible, you see everything. She had cleaned Mason Harding's suite last year. She saw the disorganized mess, the way he left expensive things on the floor. He was careless. He was impulsive. She had served drinks at this very event last year, standing in the shadows. She watched him play for 3 hours. She saw his tell. It was not a physical tick. It was more subtle. When Mason had a strong hand, a truly powerful hand, he did not get aggressive. He did the opposite. He became calm. He would lean back, just as he was doing now. He would make a joke. He would try to look relaxed. When his hand was weak, he blustered. He puffed up his chest. He tried to bully the other players. Right now, he was trying to look relaxed. David Chun finished the shuffle. He burned the top card, placing it face down. He slid the first card to Emily, then one to Mason. A second card to Emily. A second card to Mason. These were the whole cards. Their private secret. Check your cards, David said. Mason, all show, picked his cards up with a flourish. He glanced at them. Emily saw it. It was tiny. A small, involuntary widening of his eyes. A quick, satisfied puff of air from his nostrils. He immediately looked at the crowd, at the cameras, soaking in the attention. He was an actor who had just been given a great line. Emily kept her hands on the table. She did not reach for her cards. You going to look, kid? Mason chuckled. In a minute, Emily said. Her voice was small, but steady. She didn't need to look yet. She was watching Mason. He was already planning his victory speech. He had a strong hand. This confirmed the first piece of her grandfather's puzzle. Know your opponent's stake before you know your own. Slowly, Emily cupped her hands around her cards and lifted the corners. She saw a king of hearts. She saw a king of spades. A pair of kings. Pocket kings. In Texas Hold'em, this was a monster. It was the second best starting hand in the entire game. A novice would have gasped. A beginner would have smiled. Emily felt nothing. She just filed the information. She had a monster hand. And she knew her opponent had a monster hand, too. Her grandfather's voice again. When two strong forces meet, Emily, the one who controls the pace, wins. Don't react. Make them react to you. She placed her cards back down, her expression unchanged. She looked small, pale, and completely out of her depth. Okay, David Chun, the dealer, said. The blinds are set. This is the pre-flop. Miss Vance, you are first to act. This meant Emily had to bet first. What's that mean? Emily asked, her voice a perfect imitation of a confused child. Mason laughed. It means you have to put money in, kid, or you can fold. That's where you throw your cards away, which I strongly recommend. I don't have any money, Emily said. Mason rolled his eyes, signaling for more chips. It's not real money. It's chips. Just bet something. Or fold, and we can all go home. Emily looked at the pile of chips in front of her. It was a $100,000 stack, provided by the house for the game. She took her small hands. She pushed her entire stack of chips into the middle of the table. All of it. $100,000. All in, she said. The room, which had been buzzing, went dead silent. You could hear the ice shift in a glass 50 feet away. Susan Vance let out a small, strangled gasp. Mason Ace Harding, who had been leaning back in his chair, suddenly sat bolt upright. The relaxed actor was gone. What did you just do? Mason said, his voice losing its smooth, practiced tone. You said to bet, Emily said. So I bet. You bet everything? Mason was sputtering. This wasn't in the script. The kid was supposed to be scared. She was supposed to whimper and fold. This is not how the game is played. Mason yelled at David Chun. She can't just go all in. She doesn't know what she's doing. David Chin's face was stone. Her bet is legal, Mr. Harding. She's first to act. She has moved all in. The action is on you. The action was on him. Now, all the calculations Mason had been running in his head were useless. His strong hand was suddenly in danger. Emily watched him. She saw his jaw clench. She saw his eyes narrow. He was no longer playing to the crowd. He was angry. This was the real Mason Harding. The bully. You got lucky, kid, Mason growled. You picked up a good hand, and you don't even know what to do with it. Emily just stared at him, her blue eyes giving him nothing. When they get loud, her grandfather taught her, it means they're lost. They're making noise to scare away the silence. Don't help them. You know what? Mason said, trying to get his swagger back. He looked at the cameras. This kid has nerve. I'll give her that. But nerve ain't skill. He looked at his cards again. He loved his cards. They were beautiful. He took a huge stack of his own chips and pushed them forward. I call, he said. The crowd gasped. It was happening. The full bet was called. Mr. Harding calls, David Chin announced. Please turn over your cards. Mason proudly flipped his cards over for the cameras to see. An ace of diamonds. An ace of clubs. Pocket aces. The single best starting hand in poker. The crowd oohed in appreciation. That's it, shouted Frank Johnson. Ace has the aces. Mason stood up and bowed, blowing a kiss. Sorry, kid. House always wins. Susan Vance began to sob, turning away. This was it. It was over. Her life was over. Miss Vance, David Chin said, his voice gentle. Your cards, please. Emily, small and silent, turned over her 2 cards. The King of Hearts. The King of Spades. Pocket Kings. The crowd groaned. It was a cooler. A setup. The second best hand against the best hand. Emily was crushed. It was statistically a 4-1 long shot. She had an 80% chance of losing. Tough break, kid, Mason said, sitting back down. That's poker. A cruel, cruel game. Well, dealer, let's see the cards. End this poor girl's night. Emily had not moved. She had not looked at her mother. She had not looked at Mason. She was looking at David Chin's hands. She was waiting for the flop. She had lost the first battle. She knew that. But she also knew something Mason Harding didn't. She knew her grandfather was a war veteran, and he had taught her one final, critical lesson. You don't have to win every battle, Emily. You just have to win the last one. Dealer, she said, her voice clear. The flop, please. David Chin's face was a mask of professional calm. He was the eye of the storm. Around him, the room was a whirlwind of noise and shock. Mason Harding was standing, his arms raised, accepting the applause of his fans in the crowd. It's over, he yelled. Just like I said. 90 seconds. He pointed a finger at Susan Vance, who was being held up by another staff member. Ma'am, start packing. And someone get me a real drink. Emily Vance had not moved. Her small hands were still flat on the table. She stared at the 3 cards in the center. The flop, Ace of Spades, 9 of Hearts, 4 of Clubs. A complete disaster. Mason, holding 2 aces, now had a set of 3 aces. Emily's 2 kings were worthless. She was drawing dead. She had less than a 1% chance. To win, she would need both of the 2 remaining kings in the deck to be dealt. It was a statistical impossibility. The hand is not over, Mr. Harding, David Chin said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through Mason's celebration. What are you talking about, Davy? Mason laughed, sitting back down. It's over. She's dead. She needs running kings. That's not poker. That's a miracle. And miracles don't happen to people like her. Emily finally looked up. She did not look at the cards. She looked at Mason. This was it. The moment her grandfather had trained her for. It's called pot-committed ego, Emily, Michael Vance had told her, pointing to a photo of a politician in the newspaper. This man is giving a victory speech, but the election hasn't happened. He's not trying to win anymore. He's just trying to look like a winner. He's defeated himself. Emily had spent years watching people. She saw how the hotel's managers acted when they thought they were safe. She saw how the wealthy guests acted when they thought no one was listening. And she had watched Mason Harding for 2 years. His tell was real. Calm when strong, loud when weak. But now, he had the strongest possible hand. And he was the loudest person in the room. It was a contradiction. Emily's young mind saw it clearly. He wasn't playing anymore. He was performing. He was so high on his own power so drunk on the humiliation of a child that his arrogance had taken over. He was no longer a poker player. He was just a bully. And bullies have a weakness. They overreach. You're bluffing, Emily said. The room, which had been loud, fell silent again. Mason's smile froze. He let out a sharp, barking laugh. Bluffing? Did you hear that? The kid says I'm bluffing. Are you blind, girl? Look, Ace, I have the other two. I have 3 of them. You have nothing. I know what you have, Emily said. Her voice was steady. It was the voice of her grandfather. You have a very good hand. But you are still bluffing. Mason's face began to turn a deep, angry red. The camera crews pushed in. This was getting strange. Stop talking nonsense, Mason snapped. You lost. Get out of the chair. You bluffed about the bet, Emily said, her words clear and sharp. Mason froze. What? You bet something you don't own, Emily said. She turned her head, her blue eyes finding the hotel owner, Mr. Harrison, who was trying to hide behind a taller guest. Mr. Harrison, Emily called out. The owner flinched. Every person in the room turned to look at him. Mr. Harrison, Emily said again. My mother, Susan Vance. She is your employee, correct? Harrison, a man used to giving orders, looked like a schoolboy caught cheating. Well, yes. Susan is one of our best. Does he? Emily pointed her small finger at Mason Harding. Have the authority to fire her? The silence was a vacuum. Susan Vance stopped crying. She looked at her daughter, not with fear, but with a dawning, shocked awe. Mr. Harrison wiped his face with a silk handkerchief. He looked at Mason, then at the cameras, then at the other millionaires, his biggest clients, who were all watching him. He was trapped. Well, Mason, you know, Harrison stammered. This was all just a bit of fun. For charity. You can't just. A bet's a bet, Harrison. Mason snarled, realizing the ground was slipping. You wagered in bad faith, Mr. Harding. David Chun, the dealer, spoke. He was no longer just a dealer. He was the conscience of the room. You placed a bet with collateral that was not yours to lose. You did it to threaten a child and her mother. This is an outrage. Mason shouted. No, said a new voice. It was Frank Johnson, the CEO who had been laughing earlier. He was a ruthless businessman, but he hated a cheat. The kid's right. You can't bet another man's employee. That's bad form, Ace. Very bad form. A murmur of agreement went through the crowd. The tide of opinion, which had been so firmly with Mason, was turning against him. He was no longer the charming star. He was a bully who had been outsmarted. The bet for the $1 million donation, and for the job, David Chin announced, is void. The house does not recognize the wager. Susan Vance put her hands to her heart. She was safe. Her job was safe. Emily had won. She had saved her family. She had done it without even looking at the cards. Mason was shaking with rage. His entire public image was collapsing. He had been made a fool of. Fine, he screamed, his face purple. The bet's off. I don't care. But this hand is not over. He pointed at the $200,000 in chips in the middle of the table. That is still in play. And I'm winning. She is all in, and I called. I win her chips. Deal the cards, Chun. Deal the cards. I'm taking every last chip from this little brat. He was spiraling. His greed had blinded him. He had to win something. He had to crush her. David Chin looked at Emily. The chip bet is still valid. He is correct. The hand must be played to conclusion. Is that acceptable, Miss Vance? Emily looked at the man who had tried to ruin her. She thought of her grandfather. A true strategist, doesn't just win. They win in a way that the opponent never forgets. Emily gave a single, small nod. Finish the hand, please. Mason let out a sigh of relief. He would still win the pot. He would still be the winner. Thank you, he sneered. Now let's see this miracle. Dealer. The turn card. David Chun tapped the table. He burned the top card, sliding it under the flop. With a precise movement, he turned over the 4th card. The turn, the king of clubs. A collective, room-wide gasp. Frank Johnson, the CEO, choked on his drink. No, that's not possible. Mason Harding's jaw went slack. The board now read, Ace, 9-4, King. Mason's 3 aces were still the best hand. But Emily's 2 kings had just become 3 kings. It was a set over set. One of the most brutal, unlikely, and expensive hands in poker. She still loses, Mason stammered, his confidence evaporating. My aces are higher. My set is bigger. I'm still winning. I'm still winning. He was right. 3 aces beat 3 kings. He was still ahead. But he was terrified. The 1 in 1,000 chance had just happened. 1 card to come, Mr. Harding, David Chin said. The river. Mason was sweating. He was pleading with the deck. Anything. A pair. A 9. A 4. Anything. No king. No king. No king. Emily was perfectly still. She watched the fear in his eyes. David Chun burned the last card. He paused, his hand on the final card. The entire room held its breath. He turned it over. The river, the king of diamonds. The room was silent. It was a silence so complete, it was deafening. No one understood what they were seeing. The final board, ace of spades, 9 of hearts, 4 of clubs, king of diamonds. Mason stared. He looked at his 2 aces. He looked at the board. He looked at Emily's 2 kings. He didn't get it. David Chin did. He pointed to Emily's cards. Miss Vance holds a pair of kings. He pointed to the board. The board contains a pair of kings. He tapped the table. Miss Vance's hand is 4 of a kind. Kings. Then he pointed to Mason. Mr. Harding holds a pair of aces. Mr. Harding's hand is 2 pair. Aces and kings. David Chin's hands moved to the center of the table. He gathered the entire $200,000 pot of chips, and with a single, smooth motion, he pushed them all across the green felt, to the small girl in the oversized uniform. Miss Vance wins the pot, David Chin announced. The ballroom was a tomb. For 10 full seconds, the only sound was the air conditioning. Mason ace, Harding stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. He looked at the 2 kings in front of Emily. He looked at the 2 kings on the board. He looked at his own 2 aces. He was a man who lived by numbers. His brain was a calculator, constantly running odds, probabilities, and outs. What he was seeing did not compute. It was a statistical ghost. No, he whispered. It was a dry, small sound. David Chun, the dealer, ignored him. His hands moved with quiet authority. He reached for the massive pile of chips in the center of the table. The sound of the chips moving, a gentle, plastic scraping, was like thunder in the silent room. The sound broke Mason's trance. "No," he roared. The word was so violent, so full of raw panic, that several guests flinched. "You cheated!" Mason shrieked, his finger jabbing at David Chun. You set me up. This was a setup." David Chun did not stop his hands. He continued to push the $200,000 pot toward the small girl. "You can't do this to me." Mason screamed. He lunged, grabbing for the chips. "That's my money." 2 large security guards, hired for the event, stepped forward instantly. They had been standing by the doors, but they had moved the moment Mason stood up. "Sir, you need to calm down," one guard said, his voice a low rumble. "He cheated." Mason pointed at David Chun, his face a mask of sweat and fury. "And her. She was in on it. The little tramp." "That's enough." The voice was not from security. It was from Frank Johnson, the CEO. He had been watching, his arms crossed. He was a man who bought and sold companies before breakfast. He knew a legitimate loss when he saw one. "You lost, Ace," Johnson said, stepping forward. His voice was cold. "You got hit by a bus. It happens. Don't make it worse. Don't be pathetic." "Pathetic?" Mason laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "I am Mason Ace Harding. I am the face of poker. This nothing. This waitress's kid, she can't beat me." "She just did," Frank Johnson said. "In front of God and everyone. We all saw it. You had the best hand. You got beat by the only hand that could beat you. It was ugly, but it was clean. The cameras were rolling. The local news crew, who had come to film a rich man giving a big check, now had a much better story. A star's total meltdown. "Get out of my way." Mason shoved Frank Johnson. This was his final mistake. The security guards did not hesitate. One grabbed his left arm, the other his right. "Sir, you're causing a disturbance," the first guard said. "This event is over for you," the second added. "You can't." Mason was struggling, his expensive suit jacket tearing at the seam. "Don't you know who I am? I'll have your jobs. I'll have all your jobs." He was a cornered animal. But the crowd was not on his side. They were watching with a kind of cold, fascinated horror. They were watching a man's entire life, his career, his carefully built image, evaporate in real time. "Harrison!" Mason screamed, his neck veins bulging as the guards pulled him toward the exit. "Harrison, stop them. I am your main event. I'll sue you." I'll sue this whole hotel. Mr. Harrison, the owner, just watched him go. He looked sick. The heavy ballroom doors opened, and Mason Ace Harding was dragged out. I'll destroy you, his voice echoed from the hall. You'll be cleaning toilets for the rest of your life. Then the doors clicked shut. Silence returned. Deeper this time. The spell was broken. Susan Vance let out a sob that was half grief, half relief. She ran. She didn't care about the millionaires or the tables. She ran to her daughter. She reached the high-backed leather chair and practically pulled Emily from it, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. She held her, burying her face in her daughter's blonde hair. Emily, Emily, oh my God, Susan cried, her body shaking. You're safe. It's okay. It's over. We're safe. Emily hugged her mother back, her small arms tight around her neck. I'm okay, Mom. He's gone. He can't hurt us. For a moment, they were the only two people in the room. A mother and daughter, an island in a sea of tuxedos and diamonds. Then, the room remembered where it was. Slowly, a single person began to clap. It was David Chun. He was still standing at his post, but he was clapping, his eyes fixed on Emily. Then Frank Johnson joined in. Then another guest. And another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was filled with a rolling, thunderous applause. It was not the polite applause for charity. It was deep, genuine, and stunned. These powerful, wealthy people were clapping for a 12-year-old girl in a borrowed uniform. Emily, her face red, pulled away from her mother. She was standing in front of a mountain of chips. It represented more money than her mother made in 5 years. She looked at the chips. She felt no excitement, no desire. She thought of her grandfather. Money is a tool, Em. You can build a house with it, or you can burn one down. It's just a tool. This tool was not hers. It was dirty. It was won in a moment of cruelty and pain. She looked up, her blue eyes scanning the room, passing the cheering guests, until she found the hotel owner. Mr. Harrison, she said. Her voice was small, but the entire room quieted to hear it. The applause stopped. Mr. Harrison walked toward her. He looked like a man walking to his own judgment. Yes, Miss Vance. He had called her Miss Vance. Emily pointed to the $200,000 in chips. This is all charity money, isn't it? She asked. It was the buy-in for the game. For the children. Harrison nodded, his throat tight. Yes. Yes, it is. And Mr. Harding, Emily continued. He promised $1 million for the children. But he was just bluffing. A new wave of murmurs. She had named his sin. It seems so, Miss Vance, Harrison said, his face grim. Well, Emily said, I don't want to be like him. She put her small hand on the pile of chips. She pushed it back toward David Chun. Please, she said to the dealer. Make sure this gets to the children. All of it. It's not our money. David Chun looked at the $200,000. He looked at the girl. He had seen billionaires weep over losing a fraction of that amount. He gave her a slow, respectful smile. Yes, ma'am. It would be my honor. Frank Johnson, the CEO, just shook his head, a look of disbelief on his face. I'll be, he said to the man next to him. The kid's got more class in her little finger than Ace Harding had in his whole body. Susan Vance stared at her daughter. She had been terrified for her job. She had been terrified for her child. But in this moment, all she felt was a pride so fierce it took her breath away. Her daughter had faced down a monster. She had outsmarted him. She had defeated him. And then she had shamed him with her own simple goodness. Mr. Harrison looked at the chips. He looked at Emily. He understood. He had allowed a circus in his hotel. He had allowed his own employee to be threatened. And that employee's daughter had just taught him, and everyone in the room, a lesson in integrity. He knew what he had to do. This was not over. Not by a long shot. Susan, Mr. Harrison said, his voice finding a new strength. Miss Vance, would you please come with me to my office? We have a few things to discuss. Mr. Harrison's office was on the penthouse level. It was a world away from the noise of the ballroom. The walls were dark mahogany. The carpets were so thick they absorbed all sound. A single lamp on a vast desk cast a warm, private glow. The room smelled of leather and floor wax. Emily and Susan Vance entered. Mr. Harrison closed the door behind them, and the click of the latch sounded final. Susan was trembling, her hand gripping Emily's. She was a housekeeper. She had only ever been in this office to dust the shelves. She had never been invited to sit. Please, Mr. Harrison said. His voice was tired. He did not go behind his large, imposing desk. That was a place of power, and he knew he had no power in this room. Instead, he motioned to two leather armchairs near the window. He took a smaller chair opposite them. He was a man humbled. Mrs. Vance. Susan, he began. He leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. There are no words. What happened in that ballroom tonight? It was a disgrace. It was a failure on my part. Susan just looked at him, her eyes wide. She was still in shock. He threatened you. Harrison continued, his voice low. He threatened your job, your home. He did it for sport. In my hotel. Using my event. He looked directly into Susan's eyes. I am more sorry than I can say. I should have stopped it. The moment he opened his mouth, I should have had him removed. I was a coward. I was thinking about the charity, the cameras. I was not thinking about my staff. My people. There is no excuse. Susan had never heard a man like Mr. Harrison speak this way. She had lived a life of being invisible, of being the help. She was prepared to be fired. She was prepared for yelling. She was not prepared for an apology. Thank you, sir, she whispered. That was all she could manage. Mr. Harrison nodded, accepting her grace. Then, he turned his full attention to the small girl sitting beside her. Emily was no longer the frightened child on the ballroom floor. In the quiet of the office, she just seemed tired. She was still just a 12-year-old girl, and she had just been through a war. Miss Vance, Harrison said. He couldn't bring himself to call her Emily. It felt disrespectful. You were extraordinary. Emily said nothing. She just watched him. I have been around high-stakes poker players my entire life, Harrison said. I have seen men win and lose fortunes. I have never seen what I saw tonight. He paused, trying to find the right words. The cards, that was a miracle. That was 1 in a million. I don't understand that. But that's not what I'm asking about. He leaned a little closer. I'm asking about the bet. Before the flop. Before you ever saw the cards. You knew. You knew to call his bluff. Not his card bluff. His life bluff. You called him on threatening your mother. How? Emily looked at her mother's hand, holding it tight. My grandfather taught me, she said, her voice clear in the quiet room. He taught me how to listen. And how to see. See what? Harrison asked. Patterns, Emily said. Mr. Harding isn't a poker player. He's an actor. He only cares about the audience. When he's weak, he acts loud and strong. When he's strong, he acts quiet and relaxed. We all saw that, Harrison said. He had aces. He was strong, but he was acting loud. That's right, Emily said. It was a contradiction. He wasn't playing the hand. He was just bullying. He was so sure he would win. He wasn't thinking at all. She paused, remembering her grandfather's words. When a man has too much power, Michael Vance used to say, he stops thinking. He thinks the rules don't apply to him. He thinks he can't lose. That's when you have him. He's already fallen down. He's just waiting for someone to push him over. He made a bet he couldn't back up. Emily told Mr. Harrison. He wagered my mother's job. But you were the boss. The job was not his to bet. It was a fake bet. It was a bully's threat. I just said it out loud. The simplicity of it. The genius. Harrison sat back, stunned. She had analyzed a high-pressure social situation with the clarity of a master strategist. She had identified the true leverage, not the cards, but the lie. Who was your grandfather? Harrison asked, his voice full of a new, deep respect. If you don't mind me asking. His name was Michael Vance, Susan said, her voice finding its strength. She was so proud. He was Sergeant Michael Vance. He was in the Army for 30 years. Signals intelligence. He passed away last year. Harrison closed his eyes. Of course. A codebreaker. A man who spent his life finding patterns in the noise. He had not just taught his granddaughter a card game. He had armed her. He had given her a shield and a sword, made of pure logic. Sergeant Vance, Harrison said, opening his eyes. He would be very proud of you, Miss Vance. He stood up. The meeting was coming to an end. Mr. Harding made a promise tonight, Harrison said, walking over to his desk. He made it in front of cameras and 200 of this city's most important people. He promised $1 million to the Children's Fund. He looked at Susan. He will, of course, never be allowed in this hotel again. His sponsors will likely be gone by morning. But the charity, the children, they should not suffer because he is a fool. He opened a checkbook on his desk. The Minerva Hotel will honor his pledge. I will personally see that the Aces for Charity Gala receives its $1 million donation. Susan gasped. But, Harrison said, that is for the charity. That does not address the damage he did to your family. He turned to Susan. First, those medical bills. The ones for your father. I know they have been hard on you. I want you to bring them to my accountant tomorrow. All of them. The hotel is paying them. In full. Sir, I can't, Susan stammered. No. Yes, Harrison said, his voice firm. It is the least I can do. You are my employee. I failed to protect you. This is not a gift. This is an apology. A long overdue one. He then looked at Emily. He saw her bright, clear eyes. He saw the mind behind them. And for you, Miss Vance, your grandfather was right. You see things other people miss. The world needs minds like yours. He put his pen down. We are establishing an educational trust. A full scholarship for any university you wish to attend when the time comes. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, wherever you want to go, it is yours. He was mirroring the original bet. But this was not a bet. It was a promise. You deserve to use that mind, Harrison said. You should not be clearing glasses. You should be, I don't know, running the world, I suppose. Emily finally smiled. It was a small, shy smile, but it lit up her face. Thank you, sir, she said. No, Harrison said, walking them to the door. Thank you. You taught my guests a lesson tonight. You taught me a lesson. Integrity is not about the cards you are dealt. It's about how you play the hand. You are your grandfather's granddaughter. He opened the door. The sound of the ballroom, now quiet, confused murmuring, drifted in. Go home, Susan, he said gently. Take the rest of the week off. With pay. Go be with your daughter. Susan Vance walked out of the office, holding her daughter's hand. She was no longer a housekeeper. She was the mother of a genius. And for the first time in a very long time, she was not afraid. Mr. Harrison's penthouse office was at the top of the world. The elevator ride down was long and silent. Susan Vance and her daughter stood side by side in the small, wood-paneled box. Susan stared at the numbers above the door as they lit up, descending. Susan still held Emily's hand. But the grip was different. All her life, she had held Emily's hand to protect her, to pull her away from danger, to guide her through a world that was often unkind. Now, she was just holding it. As an anchor, she kept replaying the scene in the office. The hotel owner, Mr. Harrison, a man she had never spoken to for more than 30 seconds, apologizing. The checkbook, the promise to pay her father's medical bills, a weight that had been crushing her for 2 years. And then, the scholarship, a full ride, anywhere. Susan looked at her daughter. Emily was just staring at her own feet, her scuffed, oversized shoes barely visible under the hem of her uniform. She looked like any other child who had been forced to stay up long past her bedtime. But she wasn't. Susan had always known Emily was smart. She read thick books from the library. She did her math homework in her head. But Susan had never understood the depth of it. She had never seen it as a weapon. Her father, Michael, had. This one's different, Susie, Michael had said about Emily, just a few months before he died. They were in the hospital, and Emily was in the corner, quietly reading a book on astronomy. She doesn't just see the world. She sees how it works. Don't you ever let anyone make her feel small for that. Susan had thought he was just being a proud grandfather. Tonight, she understood. Her father hadn't been proud. He had been giving her a warning. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. The sound of the ballroom hit them. The party was dead. The music was off. Where there had been laughter and celebration, there was now just the low, confused murmur of 200 people trying to process what they had witnessed. The room was still full. No one had wanted to leave. As Susan and Emily stepped out of the elevator, a path cleared. It was like the parting of the Red Sea. The millionaires, the socialites, the city's powerful, they all stepped back. They were no longer invisible. A woman in a red dress, diamonds at her throat, looked at Emily with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. Frank Johnson, the CEO who had stood up for Emily, was near the coat check. He saw her. He didn't smile. He just dipped his head in a nod. It was a sign of respect from one power player to another. Across the room, David Chun was the only person still at the celebrity table. He was methodically packing his equipment. He had finished cleaning the table. The cards were gone. The chips were gone. The green felt was pristine, as if nothing had ever happened. He saw Emily. He stopped what he was doing. He stood up straight. He placed his right hand over his heart. A silent thank you. Emily, her face shy, gave him a small nod back. They were the only two people in the room who truly understood the game that had been played. Susan guided Emily toward the grand archway that led to the hotel lobby. They passed the main bar, a long, dark wood counter where guests were ordering quiet drinks. A large television screen above the bar was on, playing the late-night news. The anchorwoman was speaking, her face serious. We have breaking news from downtown. A major shock at the annual Aces for Charity Gala tonight. The screen cut to shaky, pixelated footage. Phone footage. It was Mason Ace Harding. They saw him, his face purple, screaming, "I'll destroy you. You'll be cleaning toilets." They saw the security guards dragging him, his feet scraping on the marble. The footage was raw, ugly, and devastating. "The man you see being removed," the anchorwoman's voice narrated, "is professional poker star Mason Ace Harding. Eyewitnesses say Mr. Harding suffered a dramatic loss at the celebrity table." Susan tried to pull Emily away. "We don't need to watch this, Em." "Wait," Emily said. A new anchor appeared. "Janice, we have an update just coming into our newsroom. The World Poker Tour, which sponsors Mr. Harding, has just released a statement. Harding has been suspended, effective immediately, pending an investigation into conduct unbecoming a professional." And just moments ago, Orishade Sunglasses, his largest corporate sponsor, released their own statement, terminating his contract. They cite a severe breach of the morals clause. Tonight's incident, it seems, has cost Mason Harding his entire career. Susan looked at the screen. The man who, 2 hours ago, held the power to ruin her life, was now ruined himself. He hadn't been beaten by the cards. He had been beaten by his own reflection. His arrogance had been a loaded gun, and Emily had simply let him point it at himself. "Come on," Susan said, her voice firm. She pulled Emily away from the bar, away from the lobby, away from the world of the wealthy. They walked down a long, carpeted hallway. At the end was a simple, metal-plated door. It said, "Staff only." Susan pushed it open. The world changed instantly. The warm, gentle lighting was gone, replaced by long, humming fluorescent tubes. The thick, soft carpet was gone, replaced by gray linoleum, scuffed by 1,000 work shoes. The air, which had smelled of perfume, was gone, replaced by the faint, sharp smell of bleach and industrial soap. This was their world. The downstairs. It was the world of the invisible. They walked down 2 flights of stairs to the sub-basement. They passed the laundry rooms, humming and hot. They passed the staff locker rooms. At the very end of the hall was a small door. Apartment B4. Susan unlocked it. The apartment was tiny. It was spotless. A small sofa, a tiny kitchen table with 2 chairs, and a small hallway leading to 2 bedrooms. It was the only home Emily had ever known. Emily walked in. She went past the sofa. On a small, wooden side table, next to a lamp, was a framed photograph. It was her grandfather, Sergeant Michael Vance. He was younger, in his dress uniform. His blue eyes, so much like hers, were clear. He was smiling. Emily stood in front of the picture. She didn't touch it. She just looked at it. Susan came up behind her. She put her hands on her daughter's shoulders. The night's events finally washed over her. The terror, the dread, the sudden, shocking, impossible victory. The scholarship, the medical bills, her father's name. Tears, which she had held back in the ballroom and in the office, finally came. They were not tears of fear. They were tears of pure, flooding release. A dam inside her had broken. He would be so proud. "Emily," Susan whispered, her voice thick. "You have no idea. He would be so proud of you." Emily was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the clock on the kitchen wall. Tick, tock. "He knew," Emily finally said. "He always told me." "Told you what, baby?" "He said that people like Mr. Harding, they aren't strong. They're just loud." Susan turned her daughter around to face her. She knelt, so they were eye to eye. "Emily, what you did tonight, I still don't understand it. Those cards, the 2 kings, that was a miracle." Emily shook her head. Her blonde hair shifted. "No, Mom," she said. Her voice was firm. "The cards didn't matter. This was the truth. The final piece of the puzzle." Susan looked confused. What do you mean? "You won. You had 4 kings." "I won before the cards," Emily said. "I won when he made the bet. He was beaten the moment he sat down." She was explaining it simply, as her grandfather would. He didn't have a poker problem. He had an ego problem. He had to show off for the cameras. He had to be the star. When I went all in, I wasn't betting on my cards. I didn't even know my cards yet. Susan's eyes widened. What were you betting on? I was betting on him, Emily said. I bet that he was a bully. I bet that he was arrogant. I bet that he couldn't stand a little girl challenging him. And I bet that he would be so angry. He would try to crush me. He did exactly what I thought he would. She looked at her mother. I already won. The cards were just for the crowd. They needed to see a miracle. But he was already beaten. The true strategy. It was never about the kings. It was about the man. The man who was so blinded by his own power, he couldn't see the trap. The man who had already fallen down, just waiting for someone to push him over. Susan Vance looked at her 12-year-old daughter. This small child who saw the world like an X-ray. She pulled her into a hug, a fierce, tight hug. She was not hugging a fragile child. She was hugging the strongest person she had ever known. It's over, Susan whispered into her hair. It's all over. We're safe. Emily hugged her mother back. Her eyes were open, looking past her mother, at the picture of the smiling sergeant. No, Mom, Emily said, her voice quiet, but absolutely certain. We were always safe. He just didn't know it. And that's the final river card. My hope with these stories is to give you a front row seat to a moment of perfect justice, a chance to drift and watch the game play out. I'm always curious what you were doing while listening. Were you on a break or settling in, waiting for the bully to get what he deserved? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again for the next high-stakes game, hitting that like and subscribe button is the best bet you can make. We're always improving, so all feedback is welcome. Thank you for watching.